is
a surprise.
thank you, T-Birds. Have a great day.
Okay, that's weird. Okay, so like I was saying, we have class like 2 times a week now, once via video. And unfortunately for you guys, you have to watch the video on Monday, right? And that's kind of a short turnaround time. So if I were you, I would just be like, okay, Monday is the day that I have to do English stuff. And just like put it on your calendar, right? So that when you come today, you're prepared and not confused. Because the only way we're gonna get you ready for that exam is doing 2 things a week. So that way you get a lot of practice and all that. So again, like on the schedule, even though you don't have class the 31st, you're watching the lovely video recording. You can watch it at double speed. That's how I made it through my master's. It's just watching all those videos on double speed, right? You can slow it down, like when it gets to important parts. You can skip, like and fast forward over where I'm like, okay, now you do it. And they're just like writing, right? You don't have to watch that. So you could possibly get it done in like 30 minutes instead of the whole hour. And I think that's gonna be faster than putting the information up in a different way. So, just let me know, like, those of you who watched it, was that okay? Was it helpful? Did you get the information? Okay, cool. Just wanted to show you a few things on Canvas that I think will be helpful to you, and then we'll start our lovely agenda. So there is a calendar button that you can choose, and it will show you everything that is due. So if I was going back here to do like the student view thing. Okay. So on like the right hand side of your Canvas, it says view course calendar. What's nice about that is it tells you when the assignments are due. Because that weekly overview can sort of get like, you can read through it, get a good idea, but then you're like, okay, when is everything due? So that is nice, because it will just put it on there for you. See here, anything else? I did change this one. Yes. I put modules up here at the top because that's where all like the information is, so that you don't have to like dig through all the options. And then in the announcements, I'll put stuff as I think of it and it becomes important. So like today, if I have office hours for my AP classes, so if you have a question and you want to zoom in to those office hours and ask, you totally can. Obviously, like you can email me whenever, right? But if you like a face-to-face thing a little bit better, then you can do that. And the information for how to get in that Zoom meeting is right here. So there's like a link, and a password, a passcode, all of that. So today, we're going to go over any questions you had about last week and getting stuff done. We're going to review diction and shooting an elephant. So that was your homework, and that's what we did in class in the video last time. And then we're going to add to our rhetorical toolbox imagery and detail, which are the next 2 things we want to annotate and look for, so we have something analytical to say. We're going to do some practice with that. We'll look at the use of imagery and detail in shooting an elephant. Then I'll talk to you about your homework, which is to read Salvation and do a did chart, so diction, imagery, detail for that one. Then we don't have class because Monday is Labor Day, and they just like cut it out of the schedule, right? But I did post a video where I'm talking about Salvation and then teaching you about the last part of diddles, which is language and sentence structure. So you'll want to watch that. It's like, I think it's like 25 or 30 minutes. It's the lame sound of my voice over some slides, but you'll want to add that stuff to your rhetorical toolbox and watch it before you have to annotate the stranger in the photo and fish cheeks, which asks you to use all of diddles. Okay? I put it up already, so that way you don't have to do like the half a day before class thing. You could start it tonight if you wanted, right? And have an actual 3-day weekend. How great would that be? Okay. Any questions about any of that? Yeah.
So for shooting an elephant, the soapstone, is that something we're supposed to do as homework or in class?
You did it as homework. If we're gonna kind of briefly go over that today, so you can kind of make notes and then finish it up and turn it in if you didn't. Good question. Any other? Yeah.
So we were supposed to annotate too the okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that this week is gonna be kind of working out the kinks, right, so, but when you annotate, and I, in the video yesterday, kind of annotated on my Google Doc with them, you'll do that, you'll make like comments and little comment boxes on the side, or if you hate that and you're more analog, you can totally print it out, do it by hand, and then like upload a picture. Yeah, I had some people who did that. Okay, any other questions? You guys are great. Cool. So let's look at, well, let's first review diddles. So if you have your notes, like the one with the rhetorical triangle on one side and then your notes about diddles on the other, will you pull those out? If you don't, just find a piece of paper that you can take notes on. Okay. Oh, and again, those videos, watching them are worth 10 points. And then today, there'll be an assignment that says like watch today's class, but you were in class, so all you have to write was in class. You don't have to like rewatch our experience here today. Unless you're just feeling some anxiety about separation, you can watch it again, feel in the moment. Sometimes I think it's uneven in the math, so it's fine. Okay, so your rhetorical toolbox, right? These are tools that you are going to use to look at literature, to dig deep, and then analyze to show how it's helping with the author's purpose for the piece. On your exam, there are 3 essays, but last year, because of the COVID, there was only one, and it was the analytical essay. So this is very important, and I think it's like the easiest of the 3 to do well on. So you'll really want to make sure that you are understanding the tools of the rhetorical toolbox. So that when you get to that essay and you have 45 minutes to read, annotate, look for things, and then write the essay, that you're not stressed there, like, I can do this, I have the tools, I am a rhetorical boss, right? So we've talked about the rhetorical triangle, which is a part of your toolbox. You can always talk about the various appeals that an author is making towards accomplishing his purpose. And then diddles. So if you didn't watch the video yet, that stands for diction, imagery, details, language, and sentence structure. So it's an acronym. So you want to write those down if you haven't already. Yesterday with the class, we talked about diction. What does diction mean? Word choice, right? So all authors use words. So you can always talk about an author's diction and analyze how that's helping them to accomplish their purpose. We talked about how there are loaded words and how, like, if there's a number line, right, there are words that don't evoke really any feeling. Things like the word the. A lot of nouns don't evoke a lot of feeling. If they do evoke feeling, there's probably something wrong, right? Like, you shouldn't be offended by the word the. But then there are negative connotative words. What did connotation mean?
The feeling the word gives you.
Yeah, it's like the vibe it gives you, the vibe associated with the word, the feeling behind it. What is denotation? Literal meaning, right? So the connotation and the denotation of a word are often different, right? And we talked about in the class yesterday how the words good, wonderful, terrific, you can even be like exceptional. They all mean something positive. They're like an adjective to describe the positive qualities of something, but they have different connotations because something like fabulous is way better than good or okay. And so the feelings associated with that are stronger. Yeah, any questions on a little review of diction? Okay, so we're gonna look at shooting an elephant. So if on Canvas, you will pull up your shooting an elephant. If you haven't done it, just start now and be listening along, right? And then go home and finish it. So, last night you annotated for patterns in diction, or words that like stood out and were those loaded words. And then you also annotated for purpose statements, so things that jumped out at you as being like, okay, this is the author's purpose for this piece. In the video, I talked about how often when authors are like talking about the event and then they pull back and kind of wax philosophical, those are purpose statements because the author is commenting and kind of giving you a hint as to what his purpose is. So go through shooting an elephant, turn to someone next to you, and talk about the patterns that you found as you were reading in diction, and then anything that had to do with the purpose, okay? All right, so go ahead and talk. So like you two, and you two can talk, okay? Break. I should hear much speaking.
What?
If you didn't do it, maybe listen in to someone's conversation you did, and then repent and do better next time.
My thing is restricted. There's a lot of, I noticed with
I don't know what to do about this iBoss situation. Does anyone know how to get past the iBoss?
I
it
just
started off with really like
typed in the website.
bitter words and phrases, you know?
Okay.
And then when it got to the point where you had to like,
Yeah.
you know, shoot the elephant,
I'm not very good at
it can really just sad
tech situations.
So we're trying to change. Yeah, what the. Yeah.
So you haven't read this, right? Oh, you did? Oh,
Okay, I read it too.
so. Did you read it? Did you?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, well, maybe.
So pretty much it's talking about how.
Oh yeah, that's totally fine.
It talks about how there's a police officer how people can purpose for writing it.
And then I want to add something
It talks about how one time someone was like, there's no elephant here. Oh my, okay.
Oh.
He was like in charge of going to like control it. And then we got like pressure from all over the world. Children there and shooting, because they all want you to watch. And so we killed the elephant. But solely because the town was pressuring them.
I read like, so at the beginning I was noticing it was like, oh yeah.
And I'm gonna be passing out to you a stack of books. We'll check them out at the end, but that way you
Lunch,
can
I do.
Jacobs.
And then shooting, as it goes on, its tone and diction change a little.
I should listen to these here so that they don't
I did like including more like the purpose of it. I think just making it was like toxic. He like both sides like chaotic and some of these towns
It gets in the
not the definition. That's really that's what I got. Burma is like
Thank you.
Just don't want to crack.
I did not.
Yeah, because
Like
it helps me better understand.
yeah, I think it's talking about
Yeah, which I need to do more talking, but.
still like.
Okay, so let's talk about the patterns you found. What are some patterns of diction that you found throughout shooting an elephant? Remember, you get participation points in this, so often it's nice to go first when the questions are the easiest.
Wait, what's our what you say?
What patterns of diction did you notice as you were reading through? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
At first all of his words were really bitter and upset, and slowly started to get more sad when he like described shooting the elephant. So I feel like his tone slowly shifted a little bit
Yeah.
to more mean.
Good. And tone, remember, is the attitude of the author towards what they're talking about. So at first he's just kind of he just seems like annoyed and kind of pissed off at like the Burmese people and at the imperialism situation. But by the end, he's like distraught, right? We see those words when he's talking about the elephant. Maddie, what did you notice for Patty?
That was pretty much what I was gonna say.
Okay. Any other patterns? Yeah, Dora.
I was just gonna kind of add on, but whenever he's really like, whenever he's talking about something that he's detailed about, he really like goes into depth to like show the audience like what he was feeling.
Okay. Yeah. Can you think of a specific example?
I think one would be like, what is it? When he was describing the dead Indian room, and he was saying how like it was sprawling, and like he uses words like that.
Yeah, when he describes the guy who's murdered by the elephant, right? He calls that man a coolie, which is actually a very derogatory term because what it means is like a low laborer, but in Burma, it's considered kind of racist and not nice. It's kind of like the equivalent of the N-word there, actually. So good. He describes that man, and looking at that description, let me find it. Right here. Okay, so it's on like I think the second page. He saw the Indian, the Dravidian coolie, almost naked, and he could not have been dead many minutes. The elephant had come suddenly around the corner. It says he put his foot in his back and ground him into the earth. It was a rainy season. It was soft. The base was scorched. So he goes on and on and on, and he even says that he looked crucified, right? And yesterday in the video, we talked about how crucified is definitely a loaded word because who does it remind you of? Jesus, right? You can't hear that word without being like Jesus. Was there anything else you noticed that had that reminded you of something from the Bible or about Christianity? I feel like I'm trying to ask for one of those questions where I know the answer and you don't, and that's not fair. But did you notice any other allusions or references or commonalities with something in the Bible? So if you look down where the crowd, so he talks a ton about this mob, this crowd, right? And in this kind of lightish green color here, I've annotated anytime he's talking about the crowd or the mob, and he's talking about the pressure he feels, right, from these people. Well, then when he goes down and he's talking about where he looks at the elephant, he sees the elephant, he knows that he should not shoot the elephant, and yet he's feeling pressure by these people too. And so what does he do? He shoots the elephant, right? If you think about the story of Christ and his trial before Pilate, does anyone see any commonalities there? I feel like you're nodding your head. How would those be common?
Pilate didn't want to sentence Jesus to death, but the crowd wanted to, so he ended up doing it.
Yeah. So Pilate is this guy. He's kind of like middle management, right? Which is the worst place to be because you've got bosses above you, you've got people below you, right? So you're just not going to make anyone happy. But so he gets Jesus brought to him, and they're like, we want him to die, right? And it's the feast of the Passover, and there's a special clause for Passover that you can take out 2 prisoners and release one of them. So he's like, oh, okay, great. These people are going to totally let Jesus go because the other guy's a murderer. So he's like, all right, people, who do you want me to let go? And they're like, the murderer guy, kill Jesus. And he's like, are you serious right now? And so there's that part where he washes his hands of the situation and lets Christ be crucified. And in the same vein, in this situation, he turns to the guy and he's like, is this elephant really dangerous? He's like, well, only if you would go up to him, but I don't think he's going to bug anyone. But the crowd is like, we want him dead, right? They're finally happy about this George Orwell guy who usually they're spitting at and tripping and making fun of, right? And for once they give a crap. And so he's like, ugh, and then he ends up shooting the elephant because of this peer pressure almost situation, right? So very, very subtle allusion, but parallel to the situation with Christ. So that could have been a pattern that you marked too. What else do you guys notice pattern-wise?
He kind of trashes on the people of the town pretty much the whole entire story.
Yeah, he does not like these people, right? Especially beginning, I think we get a good feeling for how he feels. But then throughout, he'll call like the sea of yellow faces, which yellow is a very racist term. People aren't actually yellow, right? That's just like, it's like calling a Native American red, right? Like, it was something that people used to kind of put you in your place and make you feel less. So he uses that throughout, but then in the beginning he talks about how they had hideous laughter and sneering yellow faces. They got badly on his nerves. They jeer at him. He was hated by them. Why do you think he talks about them so negatively? I mean,
They're
obviously he
kind
doesn't
of
like
bad
them.
to him too.
They're kind of bad to him too?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what does that do? We're like, oh, they're mean to him. How does that make George Orwell look? It's like he's a victim and being bullied, right? He's like, oh, he was bullied by these people. It was like rough, right? But who else does he not like? Yeah, he also hates them because he's like, I had already made up my mind that imperialism was an evil thing. And the sooner I got out of his job, like, the better, right? So he hates both sides. So he's like stuck in the middle. And we see a lot of this, like this contrast about feeling stuck in the middle and like there being two very opposite situations. And he's like, what do I do? Like, I'm feeling kind of stuck as the middleman who can't really, like, how do I navigate this, right? And he's confused about the situation and perplexed. Anyway, very interesting. Okay, what do you think the purpose of this piece is? So you should have filled out like a soapstone. At the end there was like that chart. So let's start with, so we can get to purpose. Who do you think his audience is? Who is he writing to? Yeah, sure.
I read that, like, I didn't think it was from, like, a specific age group, like an audience. I think it's more towards everyone that, is able to understand the subject matter.
Okay, and what is the subject matter?
I guess you could say just, like, the racism.
Okay, kind of goes with that, right? So he's talking about racism. What is he trying, what is causing the racism in this situation? What particular practice? Imperialism, right? So his subject is definitely imperialism, and then he compares it with the situation that he experienced while he was like a police officer there, right? So then he's talking, you're right, like not to kids, but like if he's talking about imperialism, who is he trying to communicate this message to? Maddie?
I said people who probably don't live there or aren't aware of like the like corruptness of the
Right? So the people who don't live there, who would care about this situation, are like the British imperialists, right? So then what makes you think that he's writing to these British imperialists and not like the Burmese people or someone else? What in the story makes you think that his purpose is to talk to these people?
how he portrays like
Go for it.
how he like portrays the situation as like people.
Okay, yeah.
Like, how he like shows the elephant suffering. At the beginning he talks about like how people were like curled up in jail cells. Awful stuff.
Yeah. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was also gonna say that in the beginning he makes himself very relatable to like people in the imperialist countries because he's explaining that like he doesn't like the people. So, but then he goes on to further explain that he doesn't like imperialism either. So he's connecting to the audience before he explains why.
Yeah. And I hadn't like kind of thought about that before, but he is talking more about how much he hates the Burmese people first, so that he can kind of get his audience on the same page as him. But then he's like, also you guys suck a little bit. And he like puts that in there after he's already created that connection with his audience. Did you want to add?
I was just gonna say, I don't feel like this is targeted at the Burmese people, because if it was, I feel like his diction would have been a little bit more kind and positive and respectful towards them.
Yeah.
But it's not.
Yeah, he would not have gotten them on his side, right? And plus, they already hate imperialism, so he doesn't really have to convince them, right?
Yeah.
I love that. Yes.
I think another thing this shows is that it's from the perspective of a or from like a policeman and stuff like that, not a Burmese person. So like Yes, it sort of also, I think, shows how it can harm them, because there's like that whole part where he's talking about like, you wear a mask and you grow into it, or something, and so by having it by like one of their own, they might be more considerate and like willing to like read and like see how it harms them too, because they might not necessarily care if it's just them.
I'm getting chills. You guys are so smart. So yes, thinking about like that rhetorical triangle, right, and the side ethos where you're using your reputation to then influence and appeal to your audience, he definitely does that, right? Because he's, I'm one of you, and yet, like, this is a terrible situation. And how does he make it feel like it's terrible? Well, he's saying it corrupts not only the people who none of us like, the Burmese, right, but also ourselves, right? Imperialism creates this mask and actually takes away our freedom, he says, because we have to appease these masses, right? And so not only do we take away the freedom of the Burmese people, but we take away our own freedom. Because these English people are not really going to care about the Burmese, but who do they care about? Themselves, right? This reminds me of Frederick Douglass, right, where he talks about Christianity and how slavery is a perversion of Christianity, because who do the Northerners care about? Themselves. So they might feel a little bit bad for the slaves, but it might not be enough to move them to action. But if they find out, oh my gosh, like as a Christian, like I might go to hell if I don't help these people, or if I don't recognize how it's being perverted in the South, I better do something. And so again, he appeals to their sympathy for themselves in order to get them to act on behalf of someone else. And it's kind of the same thing that George Orwell is doing here. I love it. And I think you also got at one of those places where he pulls back from the story and waxes philosophical, right? He talks about the mask and the lack of freedom. And that was something that I marked as part of his purpose statement too. Do you guys have any lingering questions about shooting an elephant? Okay. So we'll come back to this in a second after we've talked about diction and or imagery and details, and apply some of that also to this story, okay? So in your module for this week, if you go to the weekly overview, the next thing we're gonna work on is the imagery and detail practice. So you'll pull that up in a second, and we're gonna add imagery and detail to your rhetorical toolbox too, so you'll need those notes out. All right, so imagery and detail. What is imagery? I feel like you should all know this. What is imagery? Who remembers? I know I taught my freshmen when we talked about book theme. Let's look at my list of things. Graham. Is Graham here today?
Yeah.
Graham. Okay, what is imagery?
I feel like it's like when a writer describes something really in depth, and you kind of create an image in your brain.
Totally, right? It's very descriptive language, specifically aimed at appealing to your senses. So a lot of times we think of like imagery, like sight imagery and what you can see in that picture, but you have 5 senses. So it's description that appeals to any of those senses. So I would put sensory language. And it appeals to your 5 senses, right? So this will definitely be things you can see, because that is like our dominant sense, right? But it also includes like sound and tactile imagery, so you can describe how something feels, right? Some literary devices that would kind of fall under this category of imagery, simile and metaphor, right? You're comparing it to something else, but you're doing it in a descriptive way. Also, analogy. Analogy often uses simile or metaphor, but it's like life is like a box of chocolates, right? You're using another thing to point out like commonalities or features of something else. So when life is like a box of chocolates, you never know what you're gonna get. It's like an extended simile to create that comparison between the two. And we'll talk more about that as we get to stuff. This would also be, what else is on my list? Things like illusion. This is different than a magic illusion, right? Illusion, does anyone remember what that word means? Yeah, so it may not be like a direct quote, but you are referencing another work. So in shooting an elephant, saying crucified is referencing or alluding to Christ. Frederick Douglass, he uses a lot of allusions to either like Declaration of Independence or the Bible, or he's pulling phrases from that into his, and that means he's alluding to that other work. For sound imagery, this could include things like alliteration. Does anyone remember what alliteration is?
Starts with the same letter.
Yeah, so it's a repetition of your consonant sound. So like, she sells seashells down by the seashore, right? It's using that sh, 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 sh. Well, authors will often use a lot of words with alliteration to create like a certain sound, and that's kind of an image in some ways. Onomatopoeia would be one, any of like those sound devices. So onomatopoeia is when the word sounds like what it is. So if you said like bang, that sounds like a bang, right? Or crack. You could say zipper, right? It's like zoop. So any of those could also create images in your mind. Okay? Now imagery is typically used to appeal to your emotion, right? So on my little triangle, often this is using pathos because it's creating feelings in you. Anything you want your audience to feel, you're going to describe in better detail and more specific detail, right? So it could be like, usually when I think of like emotion, I think of like either like sadness or like joy, but it could also be things like disgust. Like if you describe something really gross, it could create disgust in your audience and like that feeling there. Any questions on imagery so far? Hopefully that's like mostly review. Okay, so you can always talk about the imagery and various devices that the author is using to then appeal to your emotion and accomplish his purpose. The other thing that you can talk about are the details. And this is kind of similar to imagery, but a little different. So the biggest thing to remember with details is that authors include specific parts of a story or facts or details to create an effect, right? So I always put like stuff the author chooses to include, and then like what he doesn't versus like what they leave out. Okay, so thinking back at like Frederick Douglass, what does he say that he specifically leaves out of his narrative details that he doesn't share? We say it louder.
Escaping.
Yeah, he leaves out his escape route, even though that would add like validity to his story, right? He does that because his purpose is to help end slavery. And if he says, this is how I escaped, then people can't escape that way. And it actually takes away from what he's trying to do, which is to help his fellow slaves, right? So he purposely leaves that detail out. Details that he includes a lot of that religious hypocrisy, right? So that he can create that theme, right, where it's perverted religion. He includes a lot of things that happen to women specifically to appeal to chivalry versus stories about maybe male slaves who would not appeal as much to people's emotion. The difference between detail and imagery is that imagery definitely has that sensory component, whereas these details may not. They may not appeal to your senses, but they do help to create that overall picture of what is happening, right? Especially in like crime novels, right? They will give you specific clues or details that are important for you to be able to be like whodunit at the end, or frame a person, right? Like they include a detail that then creates this red herring over here. But they leave out huge facts so that the mystery is maintained, right? So if they found like that last clue first, story's over, not very good. Question? questions on details? Okay, now we're gonna practice. So pull up that practice on Canvas. There are 2 passages that we're gonna read and then answer 2 questions about each of those passages. Okay, so we'll do the first one first. This one is looking specifically at imagery. This is from a story called The Woman Warrior. The 2 questions you're gonna answer at the end are what kind of imagery is used in this passage. You're gonna make a bulleted list from the 4 or 5 sentences there. And then compare and contrast the imagery of the last sentence with the first 4 before it. So there is like kind of a shift there in the imagery. So the passage says, "At first I only saw water so clear it magnified the fibers in the walls of the gourd." And what is a gourd? Does anyone know? It's like a vegetable, right? With like a hard outer shell. On the surface, I saw only my own round reflection. The old man encircled the neck of the gourd with his thumb and index finger and gave it a shake. As the water shook, then settled, the colors and lights shimmered into a picture, not reflecting anything I could see around me. There, at the bottom of the gourd, were my mother and father scanning the sky, which is where I was. Okay, so in order to write on your little document, you have to push like submit, and then it'll pull up the box where you can type. But go and answer these 2 questions: what kind of imagery is used, and then the contrast between the last sentence and the sentences before it. Take a few minutes to do that.
strong diction, for example, words like magnified, encircled, and shimmered, like it paints a picture because they're stronger.
Yeah, and what sense does that appeal to? Oh, that's like definitely manipulating your emotion, but like of your five senses, which one does that most appeal to?
Probably my vision.
Definitely, right? So he's creating like that literal picture by using words that appeal to sight. So shimmering, the shape of something, right? So good, and you're right, that imagery does appeal to your emotions, right? Any other things that you notice, like imagery being used or types? Okay, because I think it's mostly sight. I would say maybe in that beginning sentence, talks about the fibers in the walls of the gourd. That like fibers is like a texture, right? So that could be, you could say that's tactile imagery, right? Good. What then, looking at that last sentence versus the first four, how is there a shift there? Why is that different? Yeah.
I said that the first four sentences are kind of neutral and positive. They kind of, to me at least, paint almost like a dreamlike kind of feeling, and then it comes to like an abrupt halt when you have something so unexpected and strange and weird in the last sentence, and it's super blunt.
Yeah. So the first four kind of create that ethereal feeling, right? It's magical, mystical. They're looking at this gourd. The water is like reflecting, changing, and shining. And all of a sudden at the end, she sees like her parents looking up at her as like a person, right? So I haven't read this, but in my mind, these parents are probably dead or gone, right? And then she sees them, but not only does she see them in this water, but they see her, like, right? And that's an abrupt shift there because it's no longer ethereal. It's just like there's less used to describe there. You just start stating things. Do you have any questions about imagery in that passage? Okay, so then we're going to look at the second one and talk about detail now. So this is from Great Gatsby. We'll read this later on in the year. It's an awesome book. So this passage is talking about Gatsby's house. He throws these lavish and elaborate parties. And so it's describing this time when he's walking through, the narrator's walking through this house and just kind of what he sees. So it says, we went upstairs through period bedrooms swathed in rose and lavender silk, vivid with new flowers, through dressing rooms and pool rooms and bathrooms with sunken baths, intruding into one chamber where a disheveled man in pajamas was doing liver exercises on the floor. So definitely there's like imagery being used, but you're looking specifically at the details. So like, why is he choosing to talk about these specific things in the house and describe them versus other things in the house? Like, why does he choose these details? So the first question asks you to list 3 general adjectives that you could use to describe this house. So you think about, you read through the description of the house and be like, okay, what 3 adjectives, how would I describe this house? Then he'll explain the connection between the details that you see here and the adjectives that you have chosen. So how does, if you called this like an ugly house, what in the passage, what details made you come to that conclusion, okay? Then the second one, how does the disheveled man in pajamas doing liver exercises on the floor help create the mood and atmosphere of the house? Okay, so go ahead and take a minute and answer that one that same document that we just did the imagery stuff on. Okay, so what adjectives did you guys use to describe this house? Khalil, what's one of the adjectives you used? Intricate, good. What made you think that? What details?
How you go through so many different kinds of rooms and it's like very unique and different like everywhere they go and each room they pass through.
Good, right? Yeah, there's lots of different things going on. A dressing room, a pool room, a bathroom, a sunken bath. Very intricate stuff. What other adjectives did we use? Yeah.
I put disorienting because it's just like all the rooms. That could just get confusing.
Yeah, I would feel like, how can anyone feel at home here, right? There's so much going on. It's almost like a hotel, right? I like that. And so many different, that's like a very long sentence too, right? So just listing boom, 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 boom. That could feel very disorienting. Lauren, what's an adjective you used?
I just said large because of the amount of rooms it was.
Okay, yeah. Definitely a big house. What else? Go for it. You can just.
Luxurious, because
Luxurious.
all the like the expensive things he described in his house and described in his.
Yeah. Love you too. So very, say that word again.
Luxurious.
Luxurious, right? Yeah. Who's got a dressing room and a pool room and sunken baths, right? I think sunken baths are like they're in the floor, right? So it's a very fancy place. Anything else you want to say? Yeah.
I said vintage because like nobody really talks about rooms as chambers anymore.
Ooh, yeah, vintage. I like that. Yes.
I said excessive because it says dressing rooms, pool rooms, bathrooms, so there are multiples of who knows what.
Yeah. This house is a little extra. Perhaps he's compensating for something. We'll see when you read the book, right? Okay. So then we have this guy in pajamas doing liver exercises. What does that do to the mood and atmosphere? How does that help with that? Yeah.
To me, it kind of just makes it feel like people just do whatever they want in the house, and there's not really a set rules. They're just people doing all sorts of stuff all over.
Yeah. Definitely kind of this air of like, almost like a carnival, right? Like, all right, you got like all of these fancy rooms and you got people doing whatever they feel like. Anyone want to add to that? You notice how it changes the mood? It's definitely an odd house, right? Like you got this fancy house, got rando people in there, very eclectic. Okay, so the fact that he puts in that detail kind of, I feel like it doesn't quite fit with the lavishness of the house, and so definitely changes the mood of the house from just being like this fancy extra house to like something weird's going on here. Okay. Okay. Any questions about that? If you're done, you can push submit on that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about details and imagery and shooting an elephant, right? So if you want to pull it up, you can. If you want to just like kind of remember, where does he use imagery or details to then add to his purpose for the novel? I think imagery is probably the easiest one. So where is he heavy on the imagery in shooting an elephant? Yeah.
I don't know, one that
comes to mind first is when he's killing the elephant, it says something like blood was like red velvet or something.
Yeah, right? So when he talks about the elephant at the end, I highlighted in green kind of all the places he's talking about the dying elephant, because he doesn't kill it on the first shot, which is like the worst, right? So he talks about how there's a terrible, mysterious change. The elephant is stricken, shrunken, immensely old, the frightful impact. He sagged flabbily to his knees, his mouth slavered, and then later it has like that blood situation it talks about. I'm trying to remember right here. The thick blood welled out of him like velvet, right? That's a simile there that he uses. They did not die. Very slow and in great agony. Dreadful noise. They stripped the body into the bones, right? So lots of imagery surrounding the death, and then also kind of the, what would we call that? The word is like escaping me. Anyway, when they go to strip the body and take him apart, right? So then why would the author use a ton of imagery here? Because I feel like nowhere else in the story is he this detailed. Yeah.
You might want to make that contrast so you really picture the story.
Okay, good. You would want to note that there's a contrast here, that he's doing this so that we will make note of it. Why would he want to manipulate? How do we feel for this elephant when we hear all of this terrible stuff? What does that do to our emotions?
Painful to read.
It's painful to read. In fact, he leaves. Like, he can't even handle it anymore because it's so sad, right? And as readers, we're here witnessing this terrible death of this elephant. Now, he could have just said, like, I shot the elephant, it didn't die, I had to shoot it a few more times. It was kind of sad, so I left. But he doesn't. He goes on and on about the agony, the sadness, so that we feel sad about this elephant, the tragedy that imperialism has caused to occur, right? And he really emphasizes that moment because then he can, again, talk about how, like, that was such a sad tragedy, and why did it occur? Because of imperialism, because these people and the mob mentality forced him to do something he didn't want to do. Imperialism takes away his freedom and causes bad things to happen, right? So a detail that I thought was kind of important as we were reading through those images was he said that the elephant had a grandmotherly air, right? Like, that grandmotherly, like, I mean, maybe you would picture grandma, but like, it's not necessarily super sensory, but he includes that detail because how do we feel about our grandmothers? We like them. I mean, maybe they're a little crazy, but we love them. We want to take care of them, right? And then he shoots the grandmother elephant, right? And now we feel bad for the elephant. So putting that detail in there kind of just shows more of the atrocity versus just like I shot this healthy male elephant, right? Okay. Any questions on imagery and detail? When you're done with your soapstone organizer and shooting an elephant, so the soapstone thing is afterwards, you can turn that in on canvas. This week, what you're going to be doing is reading the story called Salvation by Langston Hughes. This story is a part of a collections of essays he writes about his life, and it talks about a revival he goes to where the purpose is to convert him, and then his experience there. So it's a lot shorter than this one. You are going to annotate, so just like you did last time, you'll be marking things, you'll be writing on the side, so you can see I have like a ton of thoughts written out, right? You don't want to just highlight because then you're not like writing down why that's important.
Teachers and students, pardon this interruption. To replace our normal evacuation drills and other drills, safety drills we do during the school year, we're going to be holding monthly evacuation drill trainings. Teachers, would you please take the time right now to review the evacuation drill training that's been sent out to you in email this morning. Thank you so much.
Okay, anyway, before we're so rudely interrupted. Salvation, you're going to read through it, you're going to annotate, and then at the bottom there is a did chart. So we're going to get to diddles, but today you're just going to annotate for diction, imagery, and details. And then at the end it kind of asks you to pull all those thoughts together and talk about what it's revealing out of the story, the style, and how it adds to the meaning of the passage. When you're done with that, we don't have class on Monday, so you would normally watch a video of the kids, not kids, young adults in the class, right? But I have just recorded a video over some slides, which is kind of annoying, but whatever. So we'll talk about salvation, or I will talk about it using like the royal we here or something. Anyway, I will talk about salvation, and then I will also talk about language and sentence structure. And I try to kind of go through it briefly. It's 25 minutes. I could have been more in depth about talking about like details, imagery, and diction, but I kind of focus more on the new stuff, so that way you guys get a handle on that. And when you come on Tuesday, you will have annotated fish cheeks and photo, or the stranger in the photo. So I put up that video for salvation already, so you could annotate, then watch the video, and then start on that, so that you don't have to like do it all on Monday, right? Just love breaking things. Okay, I would do your annotations first before watching the video, because you're gonna get the most bang for your buck there and practicing those skills. You could just like watch the video and like kind of cheat in that way and get some of the answers, but I would rather you try and see what you can do first and then watch the video so you can add to what you already did, okay? Questions? Okay, I'm gonna check out the books too really quick. Fire drills, if there's a fire drill, I think we just go out that way. Don't die. It's probably terrible, but anyway, you'll be fine, I promise. I'm gonna check out your books too. So I handed you a stack. The one that says Walden, so it's either green or a white book. They don't have barcodes, so just don't lose them, okay? And then you only need to bring the book when you start discussing it in class. So the first one that we're gonna read will be tucked in, and then when we're done with it, you can check it into the library. I'm just giving them all to you now, so that way if we go online, you have everything that you need. Okay, so go ahead, you can line up here. I have like this little thing where you enter your student number on, and I'll scan, okay? And then, after that, you see the other. Thanks guys, you guys can leave.